start with the...
So, hi, I'm Elizabeth McCarty. I'm pretty sure I know every person in this room. I've done social media response guides, crisis guides for the last 3 or 4 years, I believe, and have run public relations for World. And I felt that this was something we don't talk about very often, is what happens when mistakes are made and we need to make a public apology, or within our own staff.
And I'm Helen Montgomery. I'm a psychiatric social worker by profession. I was also involved in one of the more recent events requiring an apology, which has to do with the Hugo ceremony in Dublin. And we will get to that at some point.
So one of the things, and I've been involved in a few WorldCon issues that required public apologies. We had the Texas Song of the South panel fiasco. We had the Hugo streaming cutting off more than once. And there's been, I think in the interim, in the last 5 to 10 years, with the advent of more social media channels and more immediate responses to these things happening, how we respond as convention, as con runners, is very important, and how quickly we respond, especially if something is blowing up online. The outrage bubble gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and if you don't take good action, you run the risk of getting run over by it. Sorry. So I think the first thing to talk about maybe is that the overarching general steps that you need to take, as far as if something has happened that you need to apologize for. One thing that I think works well is having a holding statement. I'm sorry, I should backtrack. You should already have a group in place that you've identified as your crisis guide people. They're the people that if something happens, you need to get on the line immediately. They're the decision makers. They're the people who can find the decision makers. And clear-cut policy of how that works. So if A blows up, these are the steps you take to solve that and to address it online. Sometimes you can't have an answer right away. What you need to have is a nice holding statement that says, we hear this, we know this problem has happened, we are investigating it, we are looking into it, we will have an answer within, and I think it's important to have a time to give people an expectation, not just a net like, no, we'll get back to you one day, but say, and we'll have an answer in 24 hours, we'll let you know what the status is of this.
If I can add to your initial one, not just you need to have the group that is going to respond, and everybody else needs to know that they're not to respond.
Yes, it's so important.
So your committee, your staff, your volunteers, everybody else needs to know, shut up and let this group do their job.
One thing that I've mentioned before, it is very difficult when you are a volunteer and you have put so much of your time and your energy and your love into something to not want to defend it. Or when you see it being attacked by outside forces, per se, wanting to jump in and say, no, that would never happen. They didn't mean that. Because a lot of times people don't know the sausage making. They may not have all the information. So I think it's important to tell staff, as much as you may love us and want to help us, please follow the recommendations and whatever the team that has been set up to handle this, let them do their jobs. Do you have any more to add to that? Something that it is very difficult when it's out of your control. You maybe didn't do anything wrong per se. Maybe it's something with your facility. Maybe it's something with a guest of honor that isn't technically, you didn't do this wrong, but as the head of a convention, you're to make the apology. And I think that's difficult to do. I think it's hard to take responsibility for something that you're really not responsible for, except it's your ball of wax. And I think that a chair statement is a very important thing. And I think a chair has the ultimate responsibility to make a public statement. I do think that's where Dublin did an amazing job. And I think that there's been other conventions that have thrown people under a bus to not take that responsibility. They instead of saying this went wrong, this is what we did, we're really sorry, have said, well, that person we hired. Yeah. Bob, poor Bob. Bob was terrible. Wish we hadn't hired Bob. You should never ever throw staff under the bus for something, even if they did, even if Bob, well, I guess if Bob embezzled money, maybe we should throw Bob under a bus, but that's
Yeah,
a private internal matter that should
Right.
probably not be made public.
yeah.
Um,
If for no other, I mean, there's a couple of reasons. One is it opens you up. Well, one, it makes you look defensive, right? But it can if it turns out that you're wrong and oh, it wasn't Bob who embezzled, but it was, you know, Susie. You've now opened yourself up for potential legal actions, right? Defamation kind of things. But it also, and I think this is probably even probably the most important part from my view, is it sends a message to the rest of your staff that you are perfectly willing to throw them under the bus as well.
one, another point to that is defensiveness. A lot of times you see people wanting, sometimes it's not defensiveness. You want to explain. You want to. This is why that happened. We're so sorry that happened, and this is the cavalcade of mistakes that made this happen. Someone feels injured or misled online, they do not care. They do not want to know that you went out to dinner and you missed seeing that this thing blew up and you couldn't respond for an hour because then you had a flat tire and the dog had to go to the vet. No one cares. If someone wants your assurance that you have addressed their problem, that's what they want. They want an apology. They want to know they were heard. They do not care what happened. They do not need to know the details. Later on, you might need to address specifics of things that have happened. But I think a clear-cut apology and an acknowledgement that you have seen the problem is all anybody really needs to know. And there are times that you need to put the shovel down. You need to not engage. You just state it and walk away.
Colette.
I just wanted to at least put in the note that after, we probably should have had this team assembled sooner, but Worldcon 75 in a little too late 2016 assembled what we called basically a crisis communications group, where we had three people across the convention committee, where basically anything that was really that serious would sort of go through them, and that they would manage, like, okay, social media, you do this, you do this, you do this. And it got, because that was came formed right as I was coming onto the management team, and it ended up being, it was, I say this mostly to recommend for conventions to have that in place sooner. I mean, like I've already got one of those people who knows that they're going to get a call from me, should anything happen with this Con 3, and we want to, pull that together in a more formal way. But because they have those skills, they're a little separated from the situation. And technically Worldcon 75 we only invoked them, officially once, because very honestly, an alt-right group in Finland reported Worldcon 75 because we were donating to Con or Bust.
Well,
That was a riot.
And
We were
Worldcon
like, wait, what?
75, it's a good example because Worldcon 75 had a rather publicly messy social media interaction that happened before Colette became vice chair. That was a case of someone trying to, showing too much of the sausage making online and then defending it and then re-engaging and keeping that conversation going, that outrage bubble brewing, when it could have been a very simple statement of, this is a decision that was made and that is our decision as a Concom. Thank you very much. Instead of pages and pages and pages and pages of airing what was potentially very dirty public laundry that probably should have been kept internal.
And then deleting it afterwards, that was better.
Yeah, and that one too.
Oh.
Yeah. A note to that, if you are engaged in something online and it looks like it's going to turn ugly, before you delete anything, take screenshots of all your interactions, so that if for any reason you have to back yourself up later, you have that proof. I am not a fan of deleting anything unless it's become abusive to your staff, or it's abusive in its language, if it turns hostile online. That can cause a whole separate issue that again keeps whatever this problem is in the forefront, bubbling up all the time. It never dies down.
One of the things that Janice said in the workshop she did on Friday was, if you do reach that point where you do need to remove a comment because it was like really personally abusive or otherwise horrendously inappropriate, that when you remove it to make the statement of this statement was removed for abusive content.
Yeah.
And because then they know that, oh, that's why that comment went away. It didn't go away because nobody cared. So I was asking, I don't know if she's able to, but for those of you who don't know, one of the folks online is Marguerite Smith, and she was the co-division head for press and promotions at Dublin. And so I pinged her on a chat thing, or Esther can, but I said, if they can just kind of sum up how Dublin was structured for their crisis intervention piece.
Do you want to just cover quickly what happened at Dublin, just as an
Sure.
overview in case anyone,
Sure.
in case anyone didn't hear about it?
Right, and not everybody would have. So I was the division head for events for Dublin, and which meant that one of the things underneath in my peer review was the Hugo ceremony. Well, and a couple of other things too. So including opening ceremonies, which was paired with the retro Hugos. And we had, yay, I don't know if we can unmute you, so type might be
Yeah,
simpler.
I can't. Well,
I don't think we have a way to hear from the computer. So
Yeah, you should be able to. I don't know how loud it'll be though.
prior to here's where I'm going to veer away from doing a proper apology.
she can unmute herself, but we don't have any speakers to be able to
Yeah.
hear anyone unmuted.
Right. There's there's no speakers from the computer. So prior to the convention, and I'm gonna talk about the sausage making because I think it will help you understand what happened here and how it played to do with the apology. We were looking at how we were going to do closed captioning for the big events in the auditorium. We looked at doing it with live human beings. The cost was astronomical, and significantly more than it is over here. We tested out, so our tech folks tested out an AI version that would do text or voice to text. And during the testing phase, it worked reasonably well. And so we were like, okay, what we're going to do then is we're going to feed in the script part, right? Because then we know that will be accurate. We just keep pressing the button as people are talking and following the script. We'll switch over to voice to text when it comes to people's acceptance speeches, for example. And so we had a plan. We were not able to get it quite working for opening ceremonies. And James's first apology for the system came with that. And he made a joke that he had broken the system because he was trying to speak Irish. And so we were working on that, and we'd have it back up later. When it came to the Hugos, we had it up there. We fed the script in, and off we went. When it came to the voice to text part, though, the AI really did not do well. It started off with Ada Palmer's as the presenter for the then Campbell Award. And, she was saying some really important things. The voice to text was mangling it, leading to some very, funny typos up. And so she couldn't figure out at first why people are laughing at this fairly serious, the speech.
The cream of thrones.
Yes. And finally somebody, I guess, yelled out from the audience. And so she was able to, turn around and be like, oh, okay. And so I was watching the ceremony and going, oh God. And then at one point I looked to my left and Tammy was sitting there in the section across from me, and she had her phone and she looks at me and she's like, because our WhatsApp channel for committee for emergencies was, blowing up, and I'm like, oh, crap. So I went backstage. James ended up going backstage. We met with Keith, and I think so it ended up impacting, I think, 3 or 4 acceptance speeches, and then Ada's presentation. And we made the call to kill it. We're just like, done. And then we went into kind of the crisis management mode. And so I don't know if I have that one. So Marguerite says, she says, as an aside, I'll also raise my hand and say that I made a poor apology the night of the Hugo party. Might be worth comparing the two. I'm not sure where that one is. I'd have to try to find it. And she says, our structure was based heavily on the guide that Elizabeth did. Within promotions and press, we had our DHs and the social media area heads, and then the social media team. We generally gave the team a lot of free rein and let them respond within wide guidelines. However, we had our own WhatsApp group where they could ask us questions, and on rare occasion call for a lockdown. At that point, we made an acknowledgement statement, not necessarily an apology, and moved. And so that's, I think, what happened that evening. I think there was, at least on Twitter, an acknowledgement statement. I'm not on Twitter, so I can't tell you for sure. But James and I went into essentially the war room, where Marguerite and I think Diana and a couple of other folks were, and we started working on the apology that went out for the convention as a whole. And we were, tweaking words and phrases and everything, because we didn't want to, we knew that going in and saying, well, it worked fine in the testing phase, that wasn't going to fly, right? Marguerite also says, early on, we did have to remind staff and other committee members not to engage because of that temptation to defend, but then we'd go into official statement generating mode and try to come back to people within a reasonable time, which is exactly what you were talking about. So the apology that went out on Facebook and blog and whatnot is as follows. It's worth pointing out that our crisis communications were spot on here. We had an immediate communication channel, and when Helen says our channel was blowing up, she meant that we were already firefighting it and knew committee side that we could say something was about to happen. We called it the bat phone. We had a WhatsApp channel called the bat phone, and that was where the big emergent stuff was. Sillier, random, not urgent stuff went to what we call banana phone, which is a whole nother long story. Ring, 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 banana phone. Yes. So the statement starts with an Irish phrase that I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce, but it basically means noble people. It's sort of the Irish version of ladies and gentlemen, if you will, when they start a speech. So noble people. I would like to apologize for the problems with the closed captioning during the Hugo Awards ceremony. I am dreadful decisions that led to us using a system that failed. I would like to apologize to anybody who we have upset by this, and we totally understand that our members and community will be disappointed in this failure, for which I accept total responsibility. I'm very sorry, and I'm ready to apologize personally to those who are hurt. Sometimes we put too much trust in new technology, and that was my failing tonight. Artificial intelligence still has a ways to go in coping with human expression in all its variety. The poor transcription was stopped, but not before it undercut a number of very important speeches. Stopping it also deprived some of our audience of access to the later speeches. We are working on producing the corrected archival version of the ceremony, which will be available online. My sincerest apologies, James Bacon, Chair, Dublin 2019 and Irish Worldcon. Do you want to take that apart at all?
So one of the reasons that's such a great apology, and I would say personally, I might have cut it off a little bit shorter, but I also know James.
Right. I mean, it was very much.
I know.
Right.
I know.
But it was very much in his voice.
Right. And that's important because I think it doesn't feel like a canned apology. It doesn't feel like they did the apology generator and just threw some random sorry words on a screen to make people stop screaming. It also contains what happened, how they're going to fix it, how they're going to make people feel whole who were affected by it, and what they are doing in the future to not have it happen again. And I think it addressed all, those are the biggest points you need to address. Mm-hmm. And I really love the part that it was so quick to be able to say, we will, recognizing it wasn't just the people that were hurt, by the bad closed captioning, but the people who then couldn't have closed captioning later on in the ceremony.
Right.
There were two different groups affected there, and that acknowledgement also kind of heads off at the pass. Other people coming back and saying, "Well, but what about us?" It's a very well done apology.
He also said, and Esther comments on this as well. The moment the ceremony ended, the chair got on stage and apologized to everyone directly affected. And if they needed any more support in getting statements out or wanted to see what was on the screen, for the speakers, so we could tell them what had been up there when they were speaking. And I was with him for all of that. So, after the Hugo ceremony, all of the presenters and acceptors and winners and stuff come back on stage for photos. And you know how there's like 10 minutes of mass chaos with everybody just milling around and trying to figure out what to do right before the photos start? Maybe 5 minutes. But James and I went to every single person who had been impacted by it so that he could make that apology. And was there anything else that they needed from us? So he absolutely then did what he had said in the apology. The part that I hate to say this, I'm sorry. Where he said, we are working on producing the corrected archival version of the ceremony, which will be available online. We're still working on it.
How can you can't?
Well, no, we can. It's just taking significantly longer than we thought it would. Right. So we're basically
Yeah, but you still have the laughter and the audience reaction.
well, yeah, and so there needs what we're trying to figure out how to balance all of that, because like at one point even Ada references it then in her speech, right? So it's taking longer than we thought it would. And I'm just really grateful that as of right now, nobody's really come back and called us on it. But
Well, and because the apology was so good, I think it bought you a lot of extra goodwill. I mean, I think a lot of this is people points and goodwill points, and you points in your favor, it gives you a little bit more leeway to fix things or more time to do that. If you make a frankly half-assed apology, then you'd lose that, and your remedy needs to be immediate without having that additional bought time. We have about half a thing. Do you want to open up for questions?
well, so I know one of the questions that some of the online folks had asked me earlier was, so what, if you are the person impacted by the apology or impacted by the event, and you get that kind of half-assed apology, but you feel like it's just going to make, well, I guess I kind of need to accept it because it'll make things easier. Sometimes there are those moments where you get the apology and you're like, it's just not going to get any better than that, and I want this to be done. Any thoughts on that process? I think, Marguerite, tell me if I got that wrong.
We're all looking at a screen. So you mean like basically the non-apology apology that you maybe for political reasons you just don't want to blow this up anymore?
Yep. Yeah.
I think that's a case. Well, on a case-by-case basis, I think sometimes within a Concom itself, to keep the peace, you kind of have to, if you know the person and that's maybe the best they're going to give you. You're going to have to let it go maybe in some ways. I also think we're not very good at apologies just as people. I don't think that's something that comes easily to most people. Taking responsibility or acknowledging an insult or a hurt doesn't seem to be something people are good at. But there are times when I also think you can escalate it and say, this isn't good enough, or if the behavior is repeated, it's kind of different because it's very situational. I mean, it might be that I asked you for an extra microphone and David didn't do it. And, and he's like, well, if you want a microphone, you should have gone and gotten one. That's not my, it's your job. But if it's something code of conduct related, harassment related, I think that's a very different ballgame. So is there a way to narrow this down a bit, Marguerite?
I think it was actually Esther's question.
Oh, is it Esther?
I misremembered.
I'm kind of curious to hear what the bad apology was.
Yeah, I don't know. Marguerite, do you have the text of the one that you said was a bad apology? that you could put up?
Oh.
Oh, here we go. So, and she was clearly prepared for us to ask her for it. It was, we're sorry for the confusion and overcrowding with the Hugo Losers Party. We will be passing on your feedback and complaints along to the organizers of the party.
Oh. Oh.
So that was, I mean,
Mhm.
right. So thinking about it, right, is, I mean, I know Tammy.
I was just, the fundamental problem with that issue is when and how do you apologize for something that you fundamentally have no control over?
Right.
And sometimes you have to anyway,
Yeah.
and that's an attempt to do it, but it looks like that.
Because that party had absolutely nothing to do with Dublin.
Right.
We had nothing to do with running that party.
But it was under the umbrella of,
Right.
for everyone looking.
Right. Right. You all know that we had nothing to do with it, right? Because the Hugo Losers Party is always done by the following year's convention, or in this case, George, right? But the general public has no idea. Us, right?
What is the Phil?
So Phil's question is, well, let me read Marguerite's comment then on it. She says, there was a lot of misunderstanding about who was responsible for what, and I had reached my limit of taking blame, but I still didn't frame it as well as I could have.
And that's understandable because I was following along online because I was not at Dublin and watching the amount of people who could not grasp that it was not Dublin throwing this party and that it was not technically Dublin's fault. And I can totally understand Marguerite running
And
out of spoons.
Not to mention that was the last night of the convention and we were all kind of fried. But I think it also speaks really, for what it's
Yes.
worth, there's still people asking about it.
Yep.
Jesus, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
The other, I think the other thing is it really speaks to, and it was just after the Hugo transcription event, which had basically used up all of her energy.
Yeah, understandable.
And I think that does also, to I think your point, there needs to be a team. And I think, I forget if it was you or Janice was talking about the fact that you need to have like multiple people
was me,
handling
yeah.
social media. And then Phil, we do see your question. We'll come back to it.
We have not forgotten you, Phil. So if you have a team that is running social media, you do need to try and have a team, because one person doing this, the personal investment of it, the constantly reading negative comments over and over and over, especially during a situation like the Hugo ceremony, the Hugo Losers Party, that shifting that layer of weight across a team. Otherwise, the person handling it is A, going to get burned out, and B, I don't know anybody that does social media that doesn't take some of it personally, even if they know it's not them, it's the convention that someone might be mad at. Reading negative comments continually takes a toll on your staff. So you need to really spread that out and also make sure that your staff knows that abuse isn't tolerated. They are not there to take abuse from people. If it gets personal, if it becomes attacking, then that's when you need to maybe call in another set of hands or escalate it up the chain so that there's a response.
Yeah, so Marguerite says, well, Phil agrees that everyone was fried. He says, we did have a team, but I probably jumped too far into trying to protect them from the vitriol that night.
Yeah.
Is what Marguerite says. And Phil says, it was very late at night and you did the right thing in looking after your people. I will say that Marguerite was a phenomenal promotions DH.
So I think what Phil had asked earlier was what happens when the chair needs to apologize and the person doesn't accept the apology?
If the chair issues an apology and the person doesn't accept it, and he's not referring to any specific incident, but he's talking more generally. And I think that could be either the chair or the convention.
Right. At that case, if the person that you're apologizing to refuses to accept the apology, but you have done all you can to make them feel whole, whatever that may be, maybe it's a refund, maybe your, more apology, then you craft your statement and you issue it and you walk away. And if they keep coming back, you refer them back to the statement. Our statement is, this is all we are going to say on this matter. We have done what we can do, and that is the best, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't keep, you can't keep engaging at that point, because if they're not going to hear it and they're not going to accept it, you're not going to be able to change their mind.
Right.
I was just trying to figure out what the hell do they want at that point? It's like,
But you
just-
have to.
It sounds like some people are just, I mean, I hate to use this word, such snowflakes nowadays that, and I hate to use that word, that that their needs have to be met beyond all expectations, even if you're running. How many people were in Dublin? I didn't hear what the
5,600.
that their needs come before every other body, and it's like we're so worried about the one person, this one blade of grass or this one grain of sand, that we're forgetting about the forest
Well,
and the entire
well,
beach.
so
But
here's
you shouldn't be putting that much emotional energy into it. There is a point where you stop. I mean, if you keep engaging and keep engaging, you're fighting a fire with a teaspoon. I mean, you're
And-
pouring too much of yourself into it.
the other thing is with social media and the echo chamber that can result, right, is to remember that one snowflake can lead to an avalanche.
Exactly.
So
And it can come from an unexpected place. It may be that that you've done something that you could have handled better, and you're expecting people to kind of come to you and be like, well, gosh, you guys really bunged that up, right? And then you find out that it wasn't that at all that upset them. It was something completely other over here that you didn't see coming. And that's why, again, it's so important to have a team and a written set of instructions and everybody knowing what to do, because sometimes these things come out of like, not thin air, but they just don't come from expected places sometimes. Or,
right.
I know that San Jose had a situation where they accidentally misgendered one of their participants. And that became a very large vocal outrage, rightfully, but there was, it felt like a kind of scrambling of people trying to respond and multiple people responding, that never made the person that made the complaint feel that they had been heard and that they were going to prevent that from happening again. So it just started becoming random noise at that point.
So we have a couple of comments here. Esther says, I mean, this is also very common on social media that an apology is often taken badly. Martin says, at one time we made a deliberate choice to have chairs of the UK EasterCon feedback session who were unconnected with the convention, so they were able to call out people who were complaining in bad faith. So the folks who were moderating the feedback session were not actually working on the convention. Neutral parties. Okay, got it. And Marguerite comments, I think in response to what you were saying, Elizabeth, is that is much what happened with the unaccompanied minor
That's
scenario
right, yeah.
online. It started out small and it grew.
And one thing I wanted to say, there is a difference between issuing an apology and issuing a non-apology, which is I'm sorry you felt that way. I'm sorry you took that way. I'm sorry you felt this happened. Like the way we draft statements, and it's why it's so important to have multiple people helping you looking at your statement. Knee-jerk reactions are sometimes not the best reaction to have. And you need other people to maybe help you see if what you're saying is communicating what you actually mean. When you said the apology sounds very much like James, even though there were not many, but 4 or 5
There were
people
like 5 or 6 of us in the room.
helping him draft that. That is something I think we also need to work more on, is having other people see what we're about to say publicly before we say it. To prevent a misunderstanding.
I mean, I know as an upcoming chair, I am well aware that one of my weaknesses is I will go along, and then something will happen, and I'll be like, "Ah!" And then I'll be okay. Right? Yeah, it really does look like that. So, so I know I need people who are going to go, you need to take, let me do the vent, and before Leanne's nodding, right? Before I say anything publicly, because I need to have that like moment of get the rage out, and then I can be rational and think about it again.
And I mean, there's, I think an relatively old saying about don't send that email, like sit on an email for 12 hours or 24 hours before you send it. We had someone that had an issue with the programming this weekend before we got here. who sent an email letting me know their problems with the program and how they felt about it. And my gut reaction was not the best reaction. And I wrote something down and I walked away. And the next morning I wrote something that was, I believe, very diplomatic and nicely worded, and got some compliments by people who I respect, who said, wow, I didn't know you could be that nice.
Yeah.
But it is important, especially as a chair and as a very visible public entity as a convention, that you do have people help you craft things and word things, because sometimes the way I say something may be very different than the way Helen says something, and the way you would take what I say would be different. And you can't tell somebody else how to take what you say.
Right.
You cannot make someone feel the way you want them to feel. You can't make them see your point of view. All you can do is apologize and hope that you are sincere and that they see that you are sincere.
So going back to something that Gary said, you're saying, you know, at some point you're just like, well, what else do they want, right? So at this past WindyCon, a couple weeks ago, we did a panel on the, you know, the state of the Chicago bid, and afterwards, somebody. And so it was me and Dave were standing there, and Barb Van Tilburg was there. She had kind of brought him to the panel, somebody she vaguely knew. And he came in, he was like, well, I just want to know why I should take a risk on another Chicago WorldCon. And Dave and I were both kind of like, right, you know? And so we had, you know, we stepped out into a quieter space in the hall and asked what was up. And he was still angry about something that happened at ChiCon 7, right? And he, you know, he ranted about it, and, you know, and Dave gave what I thought was actually a remarkable apology for it, because he looked at me and said, well, first off, I want you to know you have actually found the right person. I was the chair. That was my decision. You know, thanked him for letting him know, and basically asked, you know, what do you need to hear? You know, what do you need from us to make you feel like you could take the, I'm condensing this conversation, by the way. You know, what do you need to have from us to make you feel like it would be, you know, worth taking that risk to come back? And the guy was actually like really, he calmed down pretty quickly, because he was like, well, I do feel like my complaint was heard, you know, so thank you for taking the time to talk to me. And Dave's like, absolutely, you know. So, you know, we had not expected somebody to complain about something that happened in 2012, you know, 3 weeks ago. But, you know, but it was just sort of immediately having to go right into that mode again.
Oh, those fans and their long memories.
Yes.
We have a
Martin, for the Dublin Hugo party and the Luncon Moby scooter problems, I don't remember those. I think it was remotely clear.
I don't think it was remotely.
I don't think it was remotely clear what had happened until people in the works after the convention. How can, I think that might be cons. How can cons apologize in a satisfactory way for things they don't yet understand?
The situation clarified after.
Right.
Right.
I think an addendum statement can be made that when you have more information than you had previously, I would say if the matter is dead and gone, let it stay dead and gone.
Mhm.
Don't revive, no zombie apocalypse type things happening. Don't bring something back to light if people are pretty satisfied with how it was handled. But if it is something that I think would affect future conventions, like something like an access issue, that is I think there's no problem with a convention coming back and saying, and then after further investigation, we discovered that this had happened, and we have passed that information on to next year's WorldCon, or I've passed that information on to next Capricorn's chairman, so that does not happen again.
I think it's also, that's the power of the holding statement as well, right? To be, you know, so that evening to be able to say, we're aware that there are issues, we're trying to sort it out. You know, it's 1 o'clock in the morning here. Can we get back? We'll get back to you tomorrow, you know? But that's, I think that's also where the holding statement can really come in, that you you don't say the apology immediately. You say, we're checking it out, and then come back to it. Kent.
Hi, I'm Kent Bloom, and I wanted to ask about what if you don't want to apologize? What if you think you made the
Very-
right decision, and even if it made someone unhappy, you have trade-offs, you have decisions you make, and maybe the person is not justified in the complaint that they're making.
I think in that situation, personally, I think that would be a time where I would want to go to a few people that I trust, that I respect, and ask their opinion on my actions. Because I think sometimes we're not maybe the best people to look back and say, you know, I was right. I don't need to apologize for that. Someone might have a different view on that if they're not directly involved, that could say, you know, I looked at that and thought, no, maybe I think that's something you should apologize for. You may not agree, but I think if more than one person says that other person does deserve this apology, then you should apologize, even if you don't agree. But if more than one person says, no, you're right, that person was completely batshit, wackadoodle, then I think you can go back and calmly say, I understand what you're trying to communicate to me. I do disagree, and I do not see it that way, and I don't believe we're going to come to any sort of an agreement on that, and for that I am sorry, and try and walk away. Like at that point, just try and let it. You can't please everybody all the time.
Yeah.
You know, I'm wondering if
and that may be another spot of getting into the, you know, what can we do to improve your experience for the remainder of the convention?
Right. I love that line.
I have
That's
a wonderful anecdote in that area because I got a complaint at a WorldCon from a costumer who wanted to know why we were not going to protect them from being arrested for indecent exposure, because they wanted to paint themselves blue and run around downtown in a hall costume. And we said, well, A, we can't do anything about that. And B, we'd really prefer you didn't do that. And if you do, aren't going to help.
We have there's someone who pops up every year right before WorldCon, and they always have a complaint. They're never happy, and it's for me. It's been the same person. And in Kansas City in 2016, they popped up with they were horrifically offended that the hotel rooms did not have more outlets. There is really nothing we can do about that. And I also one year it was that the Hugo ceremony room was not going to have enough seats because they had done the math and they had done the numbers, and we were going to need to get more chairs. And what were we going to do about that? In those cases, I'm sorry that you cannot plug in 18 devices. It is an older hotel in Kansas City. We had the Mule Block Hotel, which is a very old hotel. Perhaps you could find a extension cord. Maybe or rub two sticks together to make fire, but you can't say that out loud.
Esther's question is, do the panel have any advice about noise? By which I mean people who make a lot of noise online or elsewhere but have some weight. It's a similar question to Kent, as it turns out, but if they can really kick up a stink, how do you deal with that?
So we actually, we had a problem in Chicago with a convention that accused the hotel of using slurs against geeks, and that they were pulling out because this hotel had done this horrible thing. And I am Mary Robinette Cowell, who was living in Chicago at the time. She got on her Twitter feed, when she has a lot of followers, and blasted the hotel in question, which was a Westin. Capricorn and WindyCon in Chicago also use Westins. We're kind of all Starwood over in our area. And it was not, the hotel came to light later, the hotel never said that, and that these people were trying to get out of their contract by accusing the hotel of bad behavior. And I think in this case, when you have someone that has a large following, especially if they retweet something that isn't correct, that is when personally reaching out by phone or finding someone. I went, actually, on that case, I kind of went to John Scalzi, who I also know, and said, maybe you should let her know that this was not the hotel's fault, because people can take what she said and maybe not stay at those hotels anymore. There's times where you need to reach out personally to someone, whether it's by phone or through an intermediary, to talk to them and say, I'm not sure you have all the information on this situation. If they do, and it's the other way that something has gone wrong and they're amplifying that signal. There is a well-known editor of a well-known publishing house who amplifies signals very quickly and is frequently unhappy. And I do find that in those cases, it can feel in the moment like they are stirring up a ton of outrage, and it to a degree they are, but it actually, that outrage will filter down and die down a little bit quicker. And I think I think sometimes ignoring them is the best thing to do, but if they are actually on the side of the righteous, and in a good way, that you can publicly reach out to them, but I do think there's a point where I don't want to say it's none of their business, but the apology needs to go to the person that was affected and not a famous person that is championing their thing on their behalf. If you've made the apology and the famous person doesn't see it or has not understood that you made it, then I think you can reach out to that person and say, you obviously we have apologized. That person directly to make sure they feel better about the situation. I don't think you can be like,
get off your white horse now.
Yeah, I don't think you can be more I don't think you should engage more than that, because then you can have a whole different problem.
That's where you go back to we've issued our statement, we've issued our statement, we've issued our statement, and eventually people will get bored. And I think as I said yesterday, go set a fire over there to distract them. Like,
Just go shoot a gust of wind. So we are at 5 minutes.
Yeah, we've got 2 comments here. Martin says, the best handling of a complaint I've seen is a gopher who put on a division head badge just to be shouted at for an hour by a publisher who was annoyed with us.
Brilliant.
I really wish I had staff that would do that for me sometime.
Take that bullet for me.
Well, so for Capricorn, we have a long-standing tradition that one of our Concom is known as the official guilty party. The official guilty party is either somebody's adorable 90-year-old mother or somebody's brand new infant.
My daughter was official guilty party for Eric's.
So, because nobody's going to yell at them. So, we can just direct people to the official guilty party. Esther notes that she wasn't naming any names here. We weren't either for the most part. And, thank you, sis, for the answer. I wanted to give people a couple of resources as well. There is a set of books. I haven't read them in several years, but I'm definitely planning to reread them under the current circumstances. One's called Crucial Conversations and the other's called Crucial Accountability. You can buy them as a pair on Amazon Kindle. Crucial Conversations is about, how do you have the important conversations where there's a lot of emotional energy. How do you do those? And then Crucial Accountability is the partner to it and exactly what we're talking about, but how do you take responsibility for things that have happened? How do you take that accountability and do that well? So that's one of them. And then there's also a psychologist named Harriet Lerner, Lerner, and she's got a book that's called, that came out, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, Why Won't You Just Apologize? And that's definitely more geared towards sort of the layperson trying to understand why somebody who's hurt them won't apologize and all that. But there's still some really useful information there. And I've seen her speak a couple times and she's just fabulous. So I wanted to throw those out for people as well as a couple of resources for the topic.
And we've referenced my social media crisis guide. I think we call it the social media response guide now. That'll be up on this SMOFCON's website. It's also, I think, still up on Santa Rosa SMOFCON's website from last year. I normally do a workshop or a panel about it. I just figured we've been doing it a lot. Then we ended up with apologies.
And Janice has,
I'm sorry.
Janice has some of the stuff as well.
All right,
from the one
Janice
she
Gelb, who did her
so-
website workshop, will have a bunch of stuff, her slides, and also has the guide online as well.
So lots of resources out there. All right.
Just
Garrett?
out of curiosity, how about we're talking about apologies and everything. What about just getting somebody out there just to smack this person upside the head, and because it's like that's not affiliated with the convention, but just it's like,
Because that would be a code of conduct violation, Gary. And then we'd have
Not
to
to-
apologize.
Not to mention hiring hitmen tends to generally be frowned upon.
We don't have money for that, do we?
Yeah. I don't look good in orange.
I was referring to matching them on, if they're going that hard.
Oh, Lord.
The-
It's getting complicated.
The point that was made, I don't think you guys could hear it over there, y'all could hear it, was that sometimes you can find somebody who, is a friend of yours, unaffiliated with the convention, who can go online and agree with you. And be somebody adding weight to your reply. So
What dealing with?
dealing with Nazis, just call your local.
Oh,
Very nice, Phil. Thank you.
all right.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I
Yes,
believe
thank
the
you.
last panel of the convention is about to start in here, which is the feedback session. Yes? Ron is nodding at me. So
Yeah.
this will be streamed as well, Ron? Okay. So for the folks online, it will be streamed and it'll be starting in about 5 minutes or so.